All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for our bi-monthly homegrown lecture series. Of course, this was initially scheduled for last week, so thank you for attending today. Uh, you can see by the flyer, so we're going to have two talks back to back because of the postponement. So today, Paul will be talking about spring vegetable gardening, but next week, Shannon Dietz will present History of Cattle in Texas, and then I will finish out March with all about basil. And I am Brandy Keller. Next week during Shannon's talk, we will actually have the new flyer for April, May, and June. And as a reminder, when that flyer comes out, you can register for any of those talks all at the same time. So you have that part done. Um, there will be a survey at the end, and it will also be mailed out to you. I know sometimes, doing a survey every video can be uh, whatever, but it really does help us. It gives us a lot of feedback. It helps with our direction, and then it also allows us to justify doing programs online like this uh, instead of in person right now. Uh, And then one last mention is about the freeze. I would just ask everyone to hold off main questions about the freeze like with other plants. We are addressing that on our Facebook. We'll have a video that I can post also in the links later on. But all the vegetables that Paul's going to be talking about today, you will be planting those coming up. There were some things that made it the root vegetables, especially if they were covered. So, but be a lookout on our Facebook page for more information on effects in recovery from the freeze. So as of right now, we're going to go ahead and move into our program. I'd like to introduce Paul Winski, our Texas A&M AgriLife Extension horticulture agent, and he will be talking about spring vegetable gardening today. So welcome, Paul.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Brandy. And it is good to be back, to be live, and to talking to you all. We are coming to you from our 10th floor offices overlooking the beautiful 290 highway. So life is good. Everybody's warmer. I hope if you had any issues last week, you've been able to get through them. And I think it was one for the record books last week. So let's talk about something good, something fun. Spring vegetable gardening. Okay, so here we go. Let's first off, before I even get any further, I want to thank these three people because I use some of their information from presentations of the past. So Skip Richter, who's the County Extension Horticulture Agent in Brazos County now. He was here in Harris County. Carol Brower is a former CEA, County Extension Agent in Horticulture here in Harris County. And then Tom Leroy. He's a retired horticulture agent from Montgomery County, and for a while he was here in Harris County. So I sort of picked some of the information from their previous presentations in order to put this together for you guys today. All right, so why do we want to grow our own vegetables? All right, everybody gets excited about it, but what are some of the reasons? And one of those is they taste better. You know, there's nothing better than a fresh tomato, a fresh pepper, anything fresh is going to taste better than what you buy at the store. So, tastes better, it's healthier. So that's one of the pluses. The other one is you can control the pest management practices. So if you are an organic grower, you can use organic practices. If you do have an issue and you do want to spray, you can control. You can start off maybe with something softer in the way of chemicals, but you know what's going on that plant. You know when it's been applied, and then you'll know that window of when it was applied until you harvest to make sure you've got it clean and it's in a good state. The other thing is the last two are, it's good exercise and it's fun. And as you can see in the image here, you know, this time last year is when things were just starting. It was the end of March for us when we were told to work from home, but people started to get back out and work in the garden, and so they found that it's good exercise, it's fun, it brings the family together. So there's a lot of positives that come when you do garden as a family and you grow your own vegetables and you start to eat healthier. Some of the things you need to consider. One is the location of the garden. All right, where is it going to be oriented? How much space do you have? These two things go hand in hand. If you have a lot of space and you're starting out new, I would say start with something small. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Because if you are successful, and you've got a small family, you are gonna have a lot more vegetables than you know what to do with. So make sure you're using your space wisely, taking those baby steps, build up your confidence, and then you can expand from there. And then know your local planting zone, where we are. So we're zone 9A, 9B. So know when the planting times are. I grew up in the Northeast. Our planting times are completely different than they are down here. There are years when you can be planting tomatoes this time of year. We never started planting tomatoes until near Memorial Day, beginning of June. So if you are a transplant, it is different. And our growing conditions are much different. Our soils are much different. Make sure have a good idea of maybe what varieties, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit later. And then the frost dates, and we're going to look at that, and we're going to see our frost date this year blew it out of the water. So just always have that in the back of your mind. Be aware of it. So garden location, we want to get as much sun on these vegetables as possible because they will perform much better. So if we can get at least 8 hours and more than 8 hours during the growing season, that's going to be great. Can we grow vegetables in an area where we don't have 8 hours? Can you? Absolutely. Are you going to get the production similar to what it would be if you were in the full sun for that 8 hours? Probably not, but you can still do it. You want to have soil that has good drainage. That's why we recommend raised beds here. And you can see in this aerial shot here how the raised beds are here. We want good drainage. We want good soil. We want the area free of competition from other plants, which could potentially provide shade, which could also be weeds, which could take nutrients and water from these plants. And then buildings, if we're too close, if you're in an urban area, you've got to take that into account as to, where is the sun? How much sun am I getting? And are these buildings going to have a negative effect on my garden? We definitely need a water source, which is key. And then actually it's nice if it's visible. If you have it around the backside of the house and maybe you don't have any windows looking out that way, maybe you're not going to be as tempted, or you won't go out as often to walk the garden or look at it or see what's happening. The main thing, whether you're growing annuals, perennials, vegetables, whatever, get out in your garden. The more you're in it, the better of a grower you will become. So when we talk about raised beds, what are we looking at? We recommend beds that are no larger than 4 feet across. And why is that? It just makes it easier to work the beds from either side. If you're reaching across, it's a lot easier reaching into that middle of the bed when you've only got to go 2 feet, where if that bed was double the size, say 8 feet, you've got to walk in that bed. You can have some compaction issues and things like that. So 4 feet is nice across. Height, at least 8 to 12 inches. When we were at Bear Creek, we had beds that were probably about hip height, probably about 3 feet tall, which was great because for the master gardeners, they could either sit on the side of it or they could stand and work, and it was easier for them to get at it. So the height really depends, but at least a minimum of 8 to 12 inches high. Um, Avoid the treated lumber because this could over time break down, and some of those chemicals could cause an issue to the growing area. That's why using the rot-resistant wood such as cedar or redwood is ideal. You don't have to worry about any treatments, and that it's going to hold up. Probably the easiest to use is cinder blocks. And you can see that in the image down here on the right-hand side. And they were being creative here where they've got their crop inside the bed, and then they filled the openings of the cinder blocks with soil, and then they could grow another crop. I've seen people grow their herbs in these openings. So use as much of that space as possible, especially if you've got a small area. You can produce a lot of product in these type of beds, and you want to have a good quality soil and compost to add into that. So make sure you're using something good. There's a lot of good quality companies around the area that sell rose bed mix or flower bed mix or vegetable bed mix, and they have quality compost also. So that's one thing that we don't have to worry about. We've got a lot of good local producers that produce good garden soil and compost. If you don't have the space, you can also grow in containers. All right. So if you're small yards or you got a patio or you only have say a balcony, you're in an apartment, but you've got a lot of sunshine, you're facing south, you can grow in containers. The key is you want as large a container as possible. So that's why I like this image here of this whiskey barrel. Okay, so they've got some squash growing in there, and it looks like there's at least 3 plants in there. It has a large volume of soil. It makes managing the water and the fertilizing a lot easier because it's not going to dry out as quickly. Now, this image down here, I'm sure it is staged. It looks great with these peppers, but that's going to be a challenge keeping that pot watered, especially in our growing conditions. But it can be done. And so if you still want to grow, if you want to grow fresh vegetables and you are limited on space, consider containers. Again, you want to use a potting mix. Now, you're not going to want to use garden soil for this. You're going to want to use a potting mix because A, it's going to have less compaction issues, and B, you're going to have much better improved drainage. So that's going to be the key in using a good potting mix. So knowing the plants, knowing what you want to grow, we've got this great resource here. It's our vegetable garden planting dates, and you can see, so it's listed, it's got cool season and warm season. Now, we always get the question, so let's look at tomatoes down here. So tomato, we recommend you can probably start with the light green, planting, middle to the end of February. And so if you plant, then we would recommend you cover it with protection, which would have definitely been necessary. And it would be interesting. I don't know if anybody had gone in with early tomatoes, how they fared, if they used some protection. But the main question we always get is this when I plant my seeds, or is this when I go into the garden? And so my response to that is, if we were looking for a March, we're saying when the green starts is probably March 15th. Let's say it's March 15th. To me, that is when you are going in the garden with it. Because with tomatoes, you're normally doing transplants. You're not going to direct seed. So then you have to count back probably at least 6 to 8 weeks. And that's when you want to start your seed. So maybe you're starting your seed early to mid-January. You get germination. You bump them up into a 3-inch or 4-inch pot. And then come the middle of March, it's ready to go into the ground. Now, if it's a direct seeded crop, say like we'll just pick corn up top here, this is when you can start direct sowing, planting that seed out. So it really depends, and you can see on a lot of these we have transplants, slips, cut pieces, depending on what it is. But if it's a direct sow, that's when you would put it into the ground. Now down here, the other thing we added is, the average last freeze dates. So for hobby, since it's a little bit south of the city, it's recommended for 2/8. For Bush Airport, it's recommended March 1st. So if you go by the Bush date, and you didn't plant anything yet, you're fine. You with regard to your spring vegetables and the event that we just had. If you're, say, south of the city and you were following this and you said, well, I'm near hobby or south of hobby, I'm going to plant early, there's a good chance that you definitely took a major hit. And so it's just always good to be aware. I sort of tell people, hold off until March 1st, sometime within the first 2 weeks of March, and we're usually pretty safe. And then we also have the last freeze dates. So it gives you an idea. So Bush is 11/30, and the end of November, and hobby is right before Christmas, 12/20. All right. The other resource we have here is varieties, and believe me, this the number of varieties changes every year. The varieties that are out there. So this is just a good idea, a good starting point. But if you buy your own seeds, there's Johnny's seeds. There's Park Seed, Burpee. They're all reputable companies that sell good quality seeds. So you can always check through their website or their catalog and find the varieties that you want to try for down here. Mulch, we want to go ahead and mulch after we plant. It helps retain that moisture. It will regulate the soil temp, and it will also control weeds. So, minimize competition. So everything that we put in to help that plant is going to go to that vegetable plant. And the types of mulch, we can use compost, we can use leaves, pine straw, grass clippings. And with grass clippings, some people say, well, can I use it? As long as you're using it as a mulch and placing it on top, you're fine. When you start to work it into the soil, that's where we can run into some nitrogen tie-up. So using it on the surface is perfectly fine. And last but not least, you can use straw. So depending where you are and what's available, you have a lot of options with regard to mulch. We want to have adequate moisture and drainage. And so that's why the raised beds are an ideal way to go. And then drip irrigation is the other thing we want to use. Can you go with overhead irrigation? Absolutely. But the advantage of the drip irrigation is the water is going exactly where you want it, right at the soil and right where the plant needs it on the root system. We're not getting the foliage wet, which could lead to potential disease issues down the road if conditions are ideal. So if you can, and some of these drip systems are really quite reasonable now and can be used for containers or if you've got them in the garden. We also want to amend that. We talked about the mixes and all, but compost is key. It will help with moisture retention, but it also improves the drainage as it breaks down over time. So it improves the overall quality of the soil that you are growing in. And then last but not least, we also, we want to be aware of fertilizers. Okay, we're going to have to fertilize because these plants can get hungry quickly. They go from a vegetative stage to a fruiting stage, and so a lot of energy goes into that. So just in general, nitrogen is going to help with the intensity of the color of that foliage. All right, so if it's healthy, it's going to have a nice dark green color. The phosphorus, the second number, the P, helps with root development and also blooming and fruiting. Potassium overall is just going to help that vitality of that plant. So we want to use fertilizers that are what we call complete, that have nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in it. And usually it's either going to be a 1:1:1 ratio, or it's going to be probably a 3:1:2, like a 15:5:10. Again, we're talking about improving that soil structure, and we want to make sure we are adding organic matter to it over the course of the year and over the course of the season. When we talk about fertilizers, you have two options. You've got soluble, which is nice. It's easy. The plant can use it quickly because the nutrients are readily available. And it's in a form that they can take up quickly. You just have to watch that you are putting out at the recommended rate, because if you are not, there's a potential that you can burn foliage with it. And if conditions are hot and dry, we can run that. You can run into that issue. It's probably also less expensive than the next one we're going to talk about, which is the controlled release. And so the liquids can be anywhere from fish emulsion to seaweed, liquid seaweed to, Scott's Miracle Grow works quite well. I use it on mine, and I've never really had a negative problem with it. The other option is the slow release fertilizers. And so you can see they will come in with, they look like BBs. They're actually, they're called prills. And inside them, they're either sulfur coated, and the wall, the thickness is different. They'll usually release anywhere from 6 to 9 months. And the nutrients inside, as it breaks down due to temperature, moisture, other environmental conditions, the fertilizer is released into the soil and the plant can then take it up. So it's a nice, convenient way of putting fertilizer out, especially in containers. This works really nice. But it's in certain cases, we want to put maybe a slow release out and then come in with a liquid feed over top. Especially with regard to the foliage, because a lot of these plants can take those nutrients through their leaf tissue and helping keep them green and healthy. So the key tips that we want to make sure you're thinking about as you're getting ready to put your garden in is we want to select a sunny location. We want to prepare that soil before planting. So we want to get our compost in. We want to make sure we've got our fertilizer done correctly. In the two earlier talks, Shannon talked about soil testing. Brandy talked about preparing your garden. So those two programs lead in nicely as to this is some of the things you should be thinking about and getting ready to do or already started doing prior to getting to this point when we're getting close and getting ready to plant. We want to make sure we've got the right varieties. We want to plant at the right time, so that calendar is going to help you. We want to mulch that surface after it's planted in order to help control the weeds, improve the soil over time. We also want to control our diseases and our nutrition. So we want to make sure we're giving the plants, we want to minimize the stress on that plant so it will fruit and produce plenty of fruits for us throughout the season. Making sure we're properly watering, whether it's drip or if it is overhead. And then we want to harvest at the right time so we get the best quality, which is also key. So these are, if you remember these 8 tips here, it's going to help you get started in a positive way. So let's talk about some of the vegetables now that we can grow here. I've got these grouped by family, and mainly because, let's talk about, so the nightshade family, that's the Solanaceae family, and you can see in that we've got tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, potatoes, and tomatillas. Now, the reason why I've got, I'm talking about as a family is a lot of times people will run into issues because they're growing the same plants, the same crops in the same spot in the same beds, time in and time out, and they're not rotating. And so rotating does not mean in this one bed, I've grown tomatoes for the past 2 years. Now in this bed, in the 3rd year, I'm going to grow pepper and eggplant. That's not a rotation because we're still in the same family. A rotation would be we go from the nightshade family maybe to cucurbits. So we would grow pickles or cantaloupe or something else. Or we would grow something from the legume family. So when we talk about rotations, we want to rotate from outside that family and not just going with a tomato and then a pepper. That's not a proper rotation. So in the nightshade family, of course, tomatoes are probably the biggest one. Everybody wants to grow tomatoes. Um, what we want to do is within our seed packets, you are going to see these various letters. We want to go with resistant varieties. This is a problem with some of the heirloom varieties. They aren't as resistant. There's V, F, N, and T. That stands for verticillium, fusarium, nematodes, and thalaviopsis. So V, F, and T are diseases. They're usually root rot diseases. And then the N is nematodes. So if we can come in with varieties that are resistant to this, it's going to help us be more successful. So some of you might be thinking, well, how can we get, I'd like to grow the heirlooms. How can I get by that? There are companies that are selling grafted tomatoes. So the top is heirloom and the rootstock is one of these varieties that is resistant. And so you can then enjoy the heirloom tomatoes, but they're being grown on a rootstock that is resistant to these issues. Okay. When we plant, we want to go in with large, vigorous plants, so at least 6 to 8 inches tall. And I know early in the season, you can see some plants out there that are about 2 to 3 inches tall, and they are turning them out pretty quickly. So, excuse me, I would maybe grow them up a little bit larger. But the larger the plant, the better off you're going to be. In order to be successful, incorporate at least a quarter to a half a cup of a slow release fertilizer, probably a 10-10-10, or a 1:1 ratio. If you are doing full beds, then you want to, we recommend 2 to 3 pounds of a 10-10-10 for every 100 square feet. All right. Applying a weekly foliar spray of a soluble fertilizer with the micronutrients is going to help that plant. Early on, we want to grow foliage. We want to get canopy. And then when it goes to that vegetative stage, that's when we want to make sure that plant is ready to go. And then once you see that first cluster of fruit, you want to go ahead and work in another 2 to 3 tablespoons per plant of a high nitrogen fertilizer. In some cases, it's a 2100, and it's strictly nitrogen because the energy stores have changed, and the plant is going from vegetative to a reproductive stage. It's going to produce the fruit. Proper planting, so we can see here, tomato is the one plant that you can plant deeper than what it normally came in. So get your pot. You can see here the fertilizer has been worked into the soil. And what we often recommend is laying it on its side. That's why we like these larger plants. We lay it on its side. So only the top, and you can see the image down here, it's laying on its side. And then all we have is probably like the top 2 inches, 3 inches. The thing that's nice about this is A, it gives added support, and then B, it will adventitiously send out roots. So it'll root all along that stem. More roots brings up the moisture, brings in the nutrients, and the plant's going to be happier. So this is the recommended way for planting tomatoes. Now, fruit set on tomatoes is temperature dependent, and this is influenced by the night temperature. So early season, when our nights get below 50 degrees, it influences the pollination. What happens is the pollen could be deposited on the pistil, but it delays the fertilization. So the pollen has to travel to get to the ovary, and when temperatures get cold, that nuclei isn't able to travel, fertilization doesn't occur, and the flower drops off. Okay, so that's early season. Late season, we run into problems where the night temperatures, when they get higher in the mid 70s, it disrupts the pollen production. It doesn't shed properly. and then it causes flower drop. So we'll often get calls or questions, hey, my tomatoes, it's dropping its flowers. And so just be aware of, if your temperatures are getting cold, below 50, it's going to happen. And it's due to the lack of fertilization occurring. When the temperatures start to get too warm, it's affecting the pollen shed. The other thing with tomatoes is, with the larger ones, do we stake it or do we cage it? Okay, so, and both work well. It's really just a personal preference. If you're staking, the recommendation is at least a 6-foot stake. Drive it in at least 10 inches deep. Normally, do it soon after transplanting. This way, you're not negatively affecting the root system. And then as as the plant gets larger, just every 12 inches, tie it off loosely. You don't want to tie it tight. You're not tying a noose. You just want to keep that main stem growing vertical, going upright. The one thing we do recommend is, if you stake, is to remove what we call the suckers. So as you can see in this image here, I've got the arrow. These little vegetative shoots that come out from the main leaf axil, we want to remove those, just because they get in the way when you're tying off the plant. And it just makes it cleaner and easier for you to tie if you remove these suckers. If you're going to cage them, you don't have to worry about removing the suckers. There's less maintenance. So it really just depends on your preference and the space and how you want to manage it. And when we talk about cages, just to let you know, this is a trifold cage. So we can see on 3 sides. It's nice. The plant will just grow up through it, and you can easily, these openings are large enough to put your hand in and harvest the tomatoes. And on the right here, we can see this gentleman here is tying off his tomatoes. He's got his stake in there, and as it grows and gets taller, he'll come back on a regular basis and continue with the staking. All right, so we're growing our crop. It's looking great, but when is it ripe? When do I harvest it? So there are 6 stages for tomatoes. One is the green stage, so it's completely green. So if you're into fried green tomatoes, this is when you want to grab it. All right, the next stage is the breaker stage, so it's starting to break color. So it's only about 10% showing some color. It's maybe a tannish yellow, a light pink, maybe a little bit red, but you're normally going to see it probably at the base, maybe at the top of the fruit. The rest of it is going to be predominantly green. The next stage is 3, where it's starting to turn, and we're starting to see more color, anywhere from 10 to 30%. We're seeing a change in that color. Then we get to the pink stage, and this is stage 4, and so we're in that 30 to 60%. So a little bit more than half of that fruit is coloring up. Next is light red, so we're 60 to 90. So that tomato is looking quite good. And then full on red, 90% is stage 6. And so the question we sometimes get is, when can I harvest? When can I start to pick? The good thing about tomatoes is, when you pick them, they will continue to develop and sweeten even when it's not on a tree. The most frustrating thing is if you are trying to get it to say light red or red, and one day it's like, I'm going to leave it on there, another day, a little bit more sunshine and I'll get it. The only issue is you come back out and maybe a bird got to it and you've got it pecked away, or a little rodent got to it or something, a squirrel. So if you're running into that issue, you can harvest at stage 4 when it's pink. Take it in the house, set it on the countertop, and it will continue to ripen, and it will be fine. Ideally, if you can leave it on the plant, it's probably the best situation. But if you're dealing with little critters and things like that, by all means, stage 4, you'll be safe and you'll be fine. there's always pests. So let's quickly touch on a couple pests here. Tomato hornworms. So this guy is a leaf eater, and when they're this size, they can defoliate a plant quickly. Now, if you happen to see a tomato hornworm on your plant and you see these white little cocoon-like things coming out of its back, I would say leave that guy there. He's going to eat a little bit more, but he's not going to be around too much longer. This hornworm has been parasitized. So with it being parasitized, we can turn around and these are little insects that will end up, they're basically feeding on the inside of this hornworm, and then they will emerge as adults. So if you see them with the white pods on them, leave it go, even though he's going to feed for a while, because he's going to be dead pretty quickly. If you've got hornworms, some of the options are 7 BT, which is a fungus that you can put on, Bacillus thuringiensis, or insecticidal soap. The other type of problem are leaf-footed bugs, and this is the damage that they cause. So they have a piercing, sucking mouth part, and they pierce the tissue of the fruit, and their saliva, when they inject it, causes this spotting. Leaf-footed bugs you'll normally see in herds. You'll see they're orange and black, and they usually travel in a herd. They're not by themselves. They're not solitary. So here's some options on the chemical side. The last 3 are more on the organic side. They're softer chemistries. And then early blight is a fungus, which we are seeing in this image down here. It starts from the base and works its way up. You can see the infected foliage. The first step is really to just clean that foliage up, get it out of there. If you can remove the source, it'll keep the rest of the plant happy. But you can see some of the options here: chlorothalonil, mancozeb, copper, and then here's another fungus, Bacillus subtilis, common name is serenade, or even potassium bicarbonate. So the last 2, actually the last 3 are probably more of an organic approach. I'm not sure if the copper products would be considered organic, but definitely the bacillus and the potassium bicarbonate. All right, eggplant. Now let's move through some of these other ones. We want to fertilize. We would recommend about 2 to 3 pounds of a 10-10-10 per 1,000 square feet. And we normally recommend that in 2 applications, one at planting and then the other at the site of first fruit. So if you are going with the 2 pounds application per 1,000 square feet, we would recommend 1 pound at planting and then come back with the other 1 pound application when you see first fruit. In most cases, eggplant's going to be harvestable in about 60 to 80 days, and you want to harvest it when it's about 1/3 to its full size. You want it when that skin is nice and shiny. It almost glistens, because then the seeds that are inside, they will not be hard. You eat the seeds with the rest of the flesh, and it's not an issue. All right. Peppers, always a big popular one here, whether it's bell peppers or the hot peppers. Everybody wants to grow peppers. Again, come in with larger transplants, about 4 to 6 inches tall. We want to use about 2 to 3 pounds of 10-10-10 per 100 square feet. If you've got that single plant, if you're only doing a few, you want to put 2 tablespoons around that plant. And then again, when we see first fruit, come in with another 2 tablespoons around that plant. Again, we want to keep the energy going to that plant as it goes from a vegetative state to a reproductive state when it's producing fruit. Harvest, normally about 8 to 10 weeks after transplant, you should be able to start to see the fruit that you can harvest. Again, shiny, firm fruit is when you want to grab it. Now let's talk about some of the legumes. So with legumes, we're talking about green beans, lima beans, southern peas, and English peas, right? And the planting calendar tells you when you can put these in. Again, legumes are nitrogen fixing, so we're bringing some additional nitrogen into that soil. So it's nice to intercrop maybe some of these legumes into that garden. So if we talk about our beans, our bush and pole beans, we're talking about planting for our summer or spring crop, March and April, and then you can do another planting in September if you want to get it for the cool season. Harvest time is about 50 to 80 days. In most cases, the bush varieties are going to mature faster than the pole varieties. Now, you can see the images here. This upper image is the bush variety, so it's probably 12 to 14. Some could be 16 inches. But the pole varieties, this is where we can go vertical in our garden. So we can go up. So we can take, the base of it isn't going to take much space. We can train it up and we can increase the amount of, our growing space because we're going vertical. So there's several crops we'll touch on here as we work our way through that we can go vertical with them and utilize that space more efficiently. We want to harvest these when they're young and tender. So you're going to be picking your beans, maybe every other day, every 2 days, depending on how your production's looking. Your fertilization is 2 to 3 pounds, and in this case, we're going with a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio, and that's per 100 square feet, that 2 to 3 pounds. Southern peas, our planting time for these guys is April through August. Once that soil warms up, is the ideal, and we want moderately fertile soil. So if we're treating the beds with a 1 to 1 ratio, we're probably good to go with our southern peas. And we want to harvest these when the pods are mature and they start to show a little bit of yellow. And then you can harvest them and then start to shuck them. So again, southern peas, nitrogen fixing. So we're bringing some, they will be able to add some nitrogen to that bed. Some problems with legumes is this bean or pea mosaic virus. So when we talk about what is a mosaic virus, the viruses are usually present themselves as a mosaic. Think of a mosaic window. It's patchy. There's different colorations in it. It has a mottled appearance. There is no chemical control for any of the virus, whether it's ornamental or vegetable. So the main thing you have to do is just get that plant out of there. Pull it out, put it in a plastic bag, and throw it away. Do not compost it. Do not try to bring it along, because if you have other legumes in there, if you have other peas or beans, the problem is this guy, this aphid. So the pea aphids, they've got that piercing, sucking mouth part, and they will pull that sap from a virus plant and run into some issues where they can transfer it to another plant. And that's the biggest problem. So if you don't have aphids, you're probably not going to have the virus because they're not vectoring it. If you have the virus, try to make sure there's no aphids around. The ladybird beetles will feed on them. The adults and immatures, a high pressure spray can blow, knock the aphids off of the plant, or we can apply a soapy water. Horticultural oils work well because they coat and suffocate. Or if you conventional methods, something like malathion or 7 will help get them under control. Cucurbits, let's talk about some of the gourd in the gourd family. So we're talking cucumber, squash, muskmelon, which are actually what we call our cantaloupes, watermelons, pumpkins, and then of course the gourd. So summer squash, these plants need space. Because they are vines, they are runners, and this is one that doesn't do well growing up. So you've got to give it space. And we're talking with our summer squash. We're talking about zucchini, yellow, as we can see here, and then the scallop squash. So spacing is about 2 to 3 feet apart between the plants. And then you can see here with the fertilization, a 10-10-10 at 2 to 3 pounds. If you've got large beds per 100 square feet. If you just have a few plants, we're recommending 2 to 3 tablespoons per plant when it's first planted. And then when you have first bloom, come back with another 2 tablespoons around that plant in order to help it as it changes from vegetative to reproductive. The other thing with squash, we've got male and female flowers on the same plant. So our male flower provides the pollen. It's this image here on the right-hand side, and you can see it looks like a typical flower, where this flower right next to it, and these flowers here, these are the female. So this is the ovary down here. So this is what gets fertilized, and then the fruit develops from there. So the image on the left is a nice picture of the early stages of that fruit development. Cucumbers are broken into 2 classes, slicing or pickling. So it just depends. This is a vine crop that you can either need space if you're going to grow it on the ground, or I would definitely recommend trellising it because it's going to be easier to harvest, and B, it will take up less space. Fertility, if you are growing these in a row, 1 cup of 10-10-10 for every 10 foot of row. And then as they start to run again, as they get larger, about 10 to 12 inches long, add either a half a cup per row or 1 tablespoon of the 10-10-10 around the base of the plant. Again, if you had individual plants, it's probably 2 to 3 tablespoons of 10-10-10 at the beginning when it's planted into the garden. Our melons, watermelons, muskmelons, honeydews are vining crops. We can go up. You can see this is a cattle panel. So we've got down below here, we've got them growing on the ground, but we can go ahead and grow these vertically. And this is a cattle panel, and you just use, once the fruit starts to enlarge, you get some old pantyhose, tie it around it so it acts like a cradle, and that fruit will continue to develop. So we can utilize our space much better. Fertility, small amounts over 2 to 3 applications. So if we are going, if we've got a large bed, we're going 2 to 3 pounds of 10-10-10. We're going to go half of that at planting. And then again, whenever that vine starts to run, when we start to see 10 to 12 inches of new growth coming on it, we're going to come in with another application. Are there problems with cucurbits? Absolutely. We've got powdery mildew, which occurs usually when if we've got cooler temperatures or we get a lot of rain and a lot of overcast, we will see powdery mildew. If we have poor air circulation, we can run into this issue. The other biggest problem is probably the squash vine borer, which we are seeing here. So here's the adult, the moth, which is not the problem, but the female lays the egg along the stem or on the tissue. The eggs hatch, and it's the larvae that gets into that stem and starts to feed on it. The challenge is, malathion and 7, but you are going to have to really stay out ahead of the game in order to keep the squash vine borer at bay. And then the other issue are the squash bugs. So we see here in image A, the adult laying the eggs, and in B, we can see the nymphs have recently hatched, and the nymphs cause a lot of problem. They've got that piercing, sucking mouth part. They damage the disease. I mean, they damage the fruit. They damage the foliage, and it's just a mess. So growing squash can be quite a challenge because of some of the insect problems and disease problems that we have. And the last one I'm going to cover is okra. This is one that we're growing in the heat of the summer. This plant, the hotter it is, the better I think it does. It's in the mallow family, so it's actually in the same family with hibiscus. So, you know, we can plant, anywhere from July through August, but even in June, you can probably start putting this plant in once the heat really sets in. You can start to harvest this plant in about 50 to 60 days. Fertility, again, early on, we're going to come in with about 2 to 3 pounds of 10-10-10. And then after first harvest, we're going to add some additional just to keep that plant healthy and keep it in that reproductive mode. This, like we talked about with the beans, you're going to harvest on a regular basis, on a daily basis. And normally about ideally when the fruit is about 3 to 4 inches long. The other thing we'd like to recommend is, towards the end of the season, keep some of those seed pods on, and that's your source of seed for the next year. So if it's a variety that you like, you can go ahead and let some of them dry, harvest them, put them in a brown bag, and you've got your seed source then for the following season. Problems with okra is nematodes, probably the biggest issue. So you can see these nodules that it causes this deformity on the growth of the root system, which then affects the overall growth of the plant. Your two options really is a cover crop. This is called Elbon rye, E-L-B-O-N. You would plant that as a cover crop in the off season, and it would help minimize and reduce that population of nematodes that are in the soil. The other one is you just solarize that soil. Cover it with plastic in the summer, let those temperatures go up, keep it covered all summer. Basically take that bed out of production and just let that temperature really rise in there and kill off those nematodes. So that's probably the main issue that we see with regard to okra production. And with that, I know we covered a lot of information, but thank you for joining us today. And I guess Brandy or Shannon, if there are any questions or if you guys have it all covered, let me know. So I'll toss it over to you.
Yeah, I'm here. There's a ton of questions and I can't really keep up. So number one, I want to address that you will be emailed a recording of this video. Again, just please fill out the survey. I will post the survey in just a moment, but there's a lot of questions about recording. The first one, is there a difference to pruning of determinate and indeterminate varieties of tomatoes?
Not really, and the at least not that I'm aware of. I know that the pruning is usually done more if you are staking, but I have seen, and early on when I was here, the master gardeners, they did do a trial where they pruned versus non-pruning to see if there was a effect on the production. And I don't believe they saw any difference in fruit production, whether they pruned or not. But I am not aware of any difference whether it's determinate or indeterminate.
Okay.
That's basically going to tell you more of a bush variety or a taller plant, right, Paul?
Right. You're right. Your indeterminates are more of that vining type.
Yeah.
And so it's just going to constantly grow and fruit, where the determinants are going to sort of reach that their max height, and then they will continue to fruit then also.
Right.
So that's really the difference between the two.
One thing I just kind of want to jump in real quick, and I apologize, Brandy, is whenever you talked about okra, and it's one of my favorite crops to grow, but also be very aware of that there are many varieties out there. Whenever Skip was here, Paul, he was doing a lot of trials on the bush type. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have a lot of space and you want to grow okra, there are several varieties that are out there that are more compact, and you want to be careful because there are some that get really, really tall and can really get out of control. So if you don't have the space for that, and then you're planting in a small area, and then all of a sudden you see these 6 and 7 foot stalks producing okra, you just want to make sure that you pay attention to the packaging because there are different varieties out there.
Yeah, there were a couple varieties he had that I think they topped out at about 2 feet,
Mm-hmm.
say somewhere between 2 to 3 feet.
Yeah,
But they were very compact, and some of them had some really interesting foliage color also. So, when you
definitely.
talk about edible landscaping,
Yeah.
some of the okra works itself nicely into the landscape. So,
And
yeah.
that's definitely a crop that you need to stay on top of as well because it does mature pretty rapidly. You have to be on it when it starts, setting fruit like every other day kind of type thing. Because if the okra pod gets too hard, you just can't do anything with it.
Good
Sorry,
info.
Brandy.
All right, no problem. All right, Joe asks, my pepper seedling transplant started out great, but seemed to have stalled out at around 3 inches tall with 4 leaves. They haven't grown anymore in a couple of weeks, even though I have provided it a diluted fertilizer.
My question would be, how much sun are they getting and the temperatures? If it gets a little cool, peppers will sort of stall out for a little bit, and then when they warm up, they will start actively growing again. So, the amount of sun and temperature, peppers like it a little bit warmer than what the tomatoes. That's why normally tomatoes are first, and then peppers are a couple weeks behind them because we want that um, warmer soils, warmer temperatures. Another thing could be that soil in that pot is maybe a little running on the cool side, and it's sort of just sitting there, and which wouldn't be surprising with the way, depending on where you have them with the temperatures that we just had. But if you had some bottom heat to them, you'd probably see them continue their growth.
All right.
I have a
Uh,
question real quick, if you don't
mhm.
mind, Paul. Whenever you talked about the raised beds and everything, what do you recommend? Maybe do you recommend putting anything down at the bottom for a weed block, or do you go? I mean, I know there's a lot of varieties out there of like a screen that you can get water through. Some people use the organic, just kind of like laying the newspapers down,
Hmm.
different things. What do you recommend?
Honestly, I've done it where we've put them in and we've put nothing down and we've just gone in with the soil. I've seen newspaper put down. I've seen, the weed barrier, which breaks down over time. It really just depends. I think part of it depends on what are you going on top of. Is it turf? Is it an old field? A barren field, or that's got weeds. I think part of that is the key as to what it's going to be sitting on might dictate as to, do I put an additional barrier down um, for this first year, or do I just come in with the soil over top and not worry
Gotcha.
about it?
Okay.
Okay. There were a few questions about the squash bug and the squash vine borer. I'm going to post a reply with something from one of our entomologists, Wizzy Brown, on the
Yep. Yep.
squash vine borer. That's a loaded topic.
Yep.
It's
Um,
there's really no one answer for
yeah,
it.
exactly. Exactly. It's a challenge regardless. And some growers and some gardeners have even stopped just growing squash because of it. They've tried once, they've tried twice, and it's like, forget about it. I can use that space and grow something else and not have to fight it. So, there's a learning curve.
All right. Where do you, they're asking, where do you like to buy vegetable plants?
Um, a lot of times, well, in the past, when um, I would just purchase whatever the master gardeners had. Um, whether I wanted the cherry tomatoes or the larger ones. I get a lot of seeds sent to me for trials, so a lot of times I just take the trial seed or the trial
That's
plants home
wait,
because,
Paul, come on.
well, it's one of those. It's all research, So
I
we've
know.
got it out there in the garden, but then I want to grow it myself too, so I have a firsthand knowledge of what's going on. So I will do that, but any of the I would always say that the retail independent garden centers, you're always going to get a better quality than maybe the box stores.
Yeah.
Um, but if you go in there on the right day, which would normally be, I would recommend going there on a Thursday afternoon when the product is coming in for the weekend. That product's going to look just as good. A lot of times it's from the same growers. The retail independents might work with some of the smaller growers that pay a little bit more attention to detail. But you can never go wrong with any of the product at the retail independent garden centers. Brandy, I see this one question here, and I saw you reply to it, but it is saying Paula posted seed packets give ideal soil temperatures. Can soil temp be estimated by air temperature? And I would say to that, it's no, Paula. But a lot of times, if you watch what the water temperature on the Gulf is during the weather segment of the news, our soil temps are pretty close to that. So it at least gives you an idea. It's not going to be perfect, but it gives you an idea of what our soil temps are. And if not, you can always go online, and I know there are sites where you can get access to what the soil temps are for an area. I think you can even put zip codes in, and it'll give you an estimate of that soil current soil temp.
All right.
Anything else?
And would you like to take a couple more?
Let's do. It's 11 o'clock. Let's go. How about five more minutes?
Okay. When you say add 2 to 3 tablespoons of fertilizer when plants start fruiting, is that slow release or liquid?
That would be a slow release or a granular around the base of the plant. In certain cases, you might be, the liquid is going to be, in most cases, more of a foliar feed where we're, wetting down the plant with that fertilizer in order for it to take it through the leaf tissue. But it's normally going to be a slow release or a granular type fertilizer.
Okay. What can you do if you can't avoid rotating plants? I have an arch trellis that I plant to grow my pumpkins on. Last year I grew butternut squash on it. This year I'm growing pie pumpkins. Will that be a problem?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm not aware. I'm trying to think if there are any soil-borne diseases within the cucurbit family that can cause the issue, and I'm sure there are. So maybe what I might recommend is if you want to rotate out the cucurbits, maybe come in with the pole beans for one season, just to mix it up, to add some nitrogen into that soil mix, into that soil. So it's something that would probably grow up that trellis and do quite well. So that would be my recommendation of, if you want to rotate out, use something like that that's going to go up your trellis, up your arbor, and you can still harvest some beans off of it.
All right. This one should be easy. Can celery be successfully grown in Houston?
I don't know. I don't think so. But I've never seen it. I've never seen anyone talk about it. And I'm not even aware if, let me look at Aggie Hort and the fact sheets. I don't think there is not a fact sheet on growing celery.
I don't think so either.
I remember seeing fields and fields and fields of it out in California, but I don't think our temperatures and our soil conditions are ideal.
Yeah, AgriLife says that celery requires certain conditions that are up to 5 to 6 months, which would be night temperatures of around 50 degrees
Right.
and daytime of 60 and 70. So it really wouldn't do well around
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
All right. All right, let's do one more.
Okay.
Last year I had many eggplant flowers, but no fruit. Why did this happen?
Again, there may have been a pollination issue. So either, you know, a lot of times with the tomatoes and things like that, in most cases, you want bumblebees to sort of work those flowers and vibrate them in order for that pollen to come off and be able to uh, reach the pistil and the stigma and all. So there's probably a good possibility that there was either a lack of pollination, or there was some issues if they were pollinated that they weren't becoming fertilized.
All right. Well, I'm trying to see. It looks like there's one. I don't want to just leave one question, but it looks like Shannon might be doing that. A Facebook master gardener did say that they have grown Utah celery. So that
Okay.
is something, I mean, I'm sure it's possible. It's just how successful in general
Right.
celery would be, but that's good info.
And hey,
Utah celery.
and that's part of the, I guess, the beauty of having your own garden. You know, the plants don't always read what's written about them in the catalogs, and so sometimes you've got that extra green thumb, and you're able to do it. So by all means, if you want to give it a shot, you can give it a shot, but uh, you never know what the result's going to be. So by all means, go for it.
Okay, and so the one more, do galvanized water troughs used for raised beds cause too much heat for the roots or soil?
Uh, I would say no, because of the volume of soil in that trough. Along the edges, it may affect it, but remember a lot of that, if it's that bright, shiny one, it's going to reflect a lot of light too. So will it heat up? Absolutely. But I think that the volume of soil that's in there, and if it's got proper moisture, it's not going to be that big of an issue.
All right, well, that's that. I think that finishes it about up. We've had a nice long session. Paul, thank you for your information on uh, spring gardening vegetables. Stay tuned next week. If you have not registered yet, you can still register for Shannon Dietz's talk on the history of cattle, and then my following one for all about basil. So thank you again and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.